Good morning, everybody. It's time to get started.
Again, that's so my individual hands don't even nearly complete my box upstairs.
My name is Joe Solari. I help authors build great businesses.
I write pillars, action, friendship.
We're going to talk about today the metaphor we keep using in this group about summiting a mountain and how folks are supposed to find their own mountain. But in that, there's a process in mountain climbing that if you stick to, you can climb all these mountains. Now, before we get started, a little housekeeping slide here. Anybody that wants a copy of this presentation, you can go to this link or use text to get that. You can download it. The other thing about that link that you should know is down at the bottom on that page is a place for you to be able to sign up for a time to speak with me. It costs you absolutely nothing other than your and my time. And we can talk about your business. I don't care whether you've written 100 books or no books. You have the privilege, the opportunity to take some time and get your questions answered. I love to do this and help people, even if it's just to help you understand things to not worry about, okay? If we're going to talk about mountain climbing, there's, Sir Edmund Hillary is the kind of name that comes to everybody's mind. And here's a little quote for him for inspiration. And there's the whole thing here as far as inspiration. I'm putting this up here more to stick it to Craig because he hates when people talk about inspirational stuff rather than nuts and bolts stuff. So that's just to stick it to Craig. But this should be more inspirational to you. I've been coming to this thing since the beginning. The first year I came here, Craig invited me to come and said, I want you to talk about business. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to talk about? It's like, well, you figure it out. So it was a lot of figuring things out on the fly. And from that, I was able to really see this golden age of opportunity, this time that you guys are in right now, being able to write and create content and build a prosperous life from it. And the inspiration is this: there are people that I met at that first conference that hadn't even written a book that are now doing six figures, okay? Now, don't think it's magic, it's work, okay? The other thing you should understand, my partner Lisa, who's a CPA, we do back office work. We run authors' offices. These are all authors that are doing 6 and 7 figures, okay? And we take over their accounting and we help manage their business. All of them have written dozens of books, okay? They were not overnight successes. It took years of work to find their voice and to find the market that was endeared with their work. So if you're prepared to do that work, right, then you can have that prosperity. But there's no get rich quick. If you love what you're doing and you're prepared to put in the time and find that audience, then you're going to have an opportunity here to do what you love the rest of your life. So if we're going to talk about mountain climbing, let's talk a little bit about the mountain climber we all think about. And this gets to the whole idea of how we start to filter success, right? So when we think about Edmund Hillary, that name is like what we associate with the idea of doing something first, and climb the highest mountain in the world. But there's some history behind that a lot of people don't know. First is that, and you can see from this article, he climbed it with his porter, okay? It's Tenzing Norgay was there, right? There was this other guy that was on the mountain with him. And the other thing is that they were part of a British expedition to climb this mountain. And the previous day, 2 other guys tried to summit. Boutriard and Evans were the first 2 guys that they picked to try and take the summit. And they were 330 feet away from the summit, and they turned around and went back. Okay, because when you're above 8,000 meters, you're in what's called the death zone, okay? And they thought it was because of lack of oxygen that you started to die. You could only spend so much time up there. You have about 14 hours up in that space before your organs start to fail. What we now know from science is that cell mitosis actually just stops, okay? So these guys knew that they were not going to be able to make it the rest of that distance and back in that time. So they stopped and they turned around. Because they knew it meant their life and it meant endangering the entire expedition. But because of that work they did to get up there that day, they literally had walked that path, right? They had beaten down that path so that the next day Hillary and Norgay could climb. They also left caches of oxygen tanks for them. So those guys summited. Now, the day before, Robillard and Evans held the record for the highest ascent on a mountain. Previous to that, the record holder was Tenzing Norgay, okay? He had been part of a Swiss expedition a year before that actually found this whole trail up there, right? So I share this whole thing with you to get you to get a feel about all the work that we're doing collectively to help each of us summit all of our own mountains, right? That's why we're here, is to understand how to do this right. So, you know, this summit is going to be defined by you, right? Whether that's you want to make a certain amount of money, you want to hit a certain rank, you want to be a US Today bestseller. I'm not saying that any mountain is better than the other, but you need to pick which one you're going to do. But understand this, the way that you ascend any of the mountain, there's a strategy to it. And all of it starts with having a base camp, okay? Now you can kind of try your own process, and I was joking with this gentleman over here about being an outlaw. There's a certain amount of outlaw you want to be. But if you don't try the proven and I believe often ignored process, you're going to get yourself into trouble. There's some reasons why we want to do things a certain way with your business. So what is that? Just like if you're above 8,000 meters in that death zone, your business can be put into a death zone. And the most common way that happens is you run out of cash, okay? Whenever your business is in a situation where it starts to get low on cash, just like when you're in a death zone, you start to be making mistakes. You start to be doing things in a way that's influenced more by your lack of cash than by what you're actually trying to do with the business. And the numbers you see here, the 21% of business, all businesses fail in the first 12 months, and 50% fail in the first 5 years. This isn't just author businesses. This is taken from the US Census and the Small Business Administration. This is data that's covered over 100 years. Millions of businesses starting up, millions of businesses failing, up economy, down economy, every industry, every type of capitalization. It doesn't matter. These numbers are rock solid. And if you think you're special or different, then you're even more susceptible to making yourself part of the statistic. So I figured to have a little fun with this, what we do is we kind of talk about summiting a mountain, right? Let's really just beat this metaphor. So your base camp is startup, right? Every business has a startup phase. You can't eliminate this. And there's some things about the startup phase you need to keep in mind, right? Now with your business, your author business, not only are you the chief creative officer and you're the CEO, you're the main investor, right? You're the one that's putting the money into this thing, whether it's cold hard cash or sweat, whatever you might have to do to make this business work, right? And no business, whoever invests in a business, no investor wants to continue to be the source of revenue, right? Like they want to put in a certain amount of capital and their expectation is if I invest in a business, right? You buy a stock in Disney or whoever it might be, you put that money in, at some point you want your money back plus more money. And as a small business owner, it's really easy to not think like an investor because one, you're doing a lot of other jobs, and two, you love what you're doing. So part of this thing is understanding that whatever capital we're going to need to put in this business for you to be successful, we're going to make sure that we can get that money to get you to stop having to put more money into the business, and then get that money back out. no business functions until it's cash flow positive, right? We just saw a situation, who kind of followed the thing with WeWork, you know, that people, right? Like billions and billions of dollars down the tube, and a man became a billionaire because he was such an atrocity of a CEO. They're willing to pay him billions of dollars to get him out of there so they could maybe save this investment, right? Doesn't matter whether it's your business or WeWork, the issue with that business was it wasn't cash flow positive. Unless there was investors putting money in that thing, that house of cards was not going to stand up. In your case, if you don't get your business cash flow positive, there's likely not to be a situation where you can continue to keep going, right? Because your business has to be providing the working capital to grow, the growth capital. And, you know, understand that, understand that the reason most startups fail, statistically, is because they run out of funding. Like, they haven't figured out how much money they really need to get to that point where the business is making money itself. And it's something I've observed with authors a lot. It's like, I mean, in the most way it presents, it's like, well, my early books, you know, my first book is going to generate enough revenue that it's going to pay for the covers for book 2. And I'm writing a 4-book series in epic fantasy. It's like, well, that plan's never going to work, right? Because epic fantasy readers don't look at a series unless there's at least 2 books there and a 3rd on pre-order. Like, that's a launch in that particular genre. Like, so that is a plan that was doomed before you started it. But I'm going to show you some ways here that you can think through this stuff. And I mean, literally you can do this stuff just on a sheet of paper or your little fancy notebooks you got as, you know, coming to this conference. Now, we also have this other myth that, like, businesses just go up and to the right. Like, this is how our ascent's going to be. And that's not the author business. This is the author business. Okay? Right? So, and I've been through it, and not just in my own writing, but in any venture, when you're getting started and you have just that dream and the aspirational piece where you know in your mind what you have the potential to create, and then reality comes into that and starts to tell you what it really is going to look like. But the other part of that is, I'm going to show you that, you know, this valley of despair, like, this isn't just your emotional state, right? It's a big part of it, that's what you're feeling. But there's actually some economics behind that. There's some things in the industry, the way that the author business works, that drives those up and downs, that you're going to need to plan for and think through so that you can try. I'm not saying you're going to get all those bumps out. You're not going to make it like the last slide, but at least smooth it out a little bit and know that when you're in that pit of despair, that, you know, the only way out is through. And the basis of all of this is that your book is this launch is the building block, right? So if we can get the profitability of launch, then stacking up launches will stack up profitability. But if we don't really think through that first launch and you know, consecutive launches, that how the money is being spent on that, and when it's coming back, we're going to have problems. So I have this concept called the launch trough, right? And we're going to plan the use of cash at that launch level. And to give you an example, this is a launch from an author, and as you can see, when we stopped doing this chart, I mean, the book eventually came out of this trough, but when this was an author who, it was their first launch, so they had no idea how the book was going to perform. And of course, they came to 20Books, they would think like everybody makes their money back the first day, but that's a lie. But what we understand from looking at this is that you have cash that's going out over time. So you have your book covers that you're paying for, you have your editing, right? And that money is all going out the door. Then, as you can see, I think it was around, what was it here, around January or so, the book launches and they start making, there's actually sales happening but we don't have cash, right? Because we've got to wait 60 days for our cash. So once the book was launched, there was still, we're still going down this deeper into this hole before things turned around, because we're running everything on what we call a cash basis, right? We're waiting. We're going to run all our accounting on when the money comes back to us, right? When we actually spend the money and when we actually get that cash back in our hand. So understanding how you're going to get through a period like that is really important when you're a starting author, because if this is money you're scraping together to do this launch, and you don't necessarily know how long it's going to take to get out of that hole, and no one when they're just starting knows that, right? Like your first launch is a huge experiment, right? Your next one you have a better feel for it, and it's going to change. But if you're trying to do that example of a 3-book launch, rapid release, epic fantasy, that means you have to think about all of those books as part of that launch, and you need to map out the depth. So a launch trough has a depth, how far in the hole we're going to go, and the duration, how long it takes us to get to break even, right? Once you know that, and you can look at that, then you're going to be able to understand for that launch, which at this point is your early stages, this is basically your whole business, you understand what your starting capital is. Now, some of you folks that were maybe at the advanced business session, you may have seen these already. So what you're looking at is sales curves. And these are averages of 3 different authors' businesses. There's 3 different genres here. These authors are all making 6 figures. And these authors have multiple books. So what you're looking at is an aggregate of all of those books and how they perform in each month launch. So they had 20 books. We took the first month of all of those launches, added them together, and averaged them out. And what I've looked at, God, how many of these things now? Hundreds. There's some things that are starting to be very clear that all launches, it doesn't matter whether you're an author making 7 figures or 6 figures, all launches have these characteristics. And they are, you have this initial deep, steep drop after launch, right? But the other thing I should share with this is that these authors are all in KU. So there's, depending on there's anywhere from 50 to 80% KU read as a part of this. But understand that the money you're going to make back on that launch, if you don't see that money come back in the first 3 months, it's going to take longer, right? Because then you see we go through a second phase where we have a lower deterioration, and then we have what we call this long tail. Now, the thing that I get out of this is that with some of these authors and knowing kind of what's behind the business, you can see these bumps, right? Like the orange one. What we're seeing is when there's new series like coming in and helping this author bring sales to all the other books. Because remember, this is an aggregate of all their sales. And then as you see with this white one down here, where the tail picks up there, that author collaborated with another author and brought over audience from that author's audience that then began to read through their things. So the other thing that this is kind of fun to do and helps you to see is how are you building your business over time, right? That long tail can show you if you're adding real readers to your audience. The main reason I want to show it to you is so you understand this is what's driving those ups and downs, right? It's not the algorithm, it's not all this wushu and stuff we worry about. It's just binging of content, especially if you're heavy into KU. People, if they like the book, they're going to read it, and they're going to read it fast, and they're going to go somewhere else until you have another book, right? So, and as a starting author, when you do that, it's okay if your launch trough doesn't get taken out in that first 3 months, right? That doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you're learning about your business. Okay? But don't have expectations that something's going to magically happen in month 9 unless it's a new book. Okay? You're not going to get, it's not going to be advertising, it's not going to be a list swap, it's going to be building an audience. Now, how do we outfit this expedition? And this, I'm not trying to be snide with this, but like, you need a book. Like, I know there's people here that haven't written their book. Okay? So, you have to have a product. You have to have something, and it's okay in the beginning that that product isn't perfect. You need to get that out into the world, and you need to see what the audience is going to do with that. And if you're open to that, and you're willing to take some criticism and learn from your mistakes, you can do the next book better, right? The other things you're going to need as you get started is an EIN number, or an EIN, which is an employee identification number. This is something you can get for free off the irs.gov site, okay? Now you could go set up your business and run as what's called as a sole proprietor. You're all sole proprietors once you start being authors. You don't have to register to do that. You're just a sole proprietor, okay? That's a term we use to talk about somebody that's not working for somebody else. It's mainly used by the IRS to kind of designate the certain type of income that you're getting, right? Now you can run as a sole proprietor on your social security number. In fact, a lot of you people are probably doing that, and that's okay. The reason that Lisa and I suggest that you use an EIN is because it allows you to protect your identity better, okay? Because anytime you're putting your social security number out into any of these systems, there's a chance that it can be exploited and used against you, whereas an EIN works just like a social security number as far as for tax purposes, and that's what you need to give Amazon and Kobo and all these guys so they know to pay you. So the first thing you want to do is you want to go get one of those EINs, and it's free. You go fill a thing out. It takes, what would you say, 15, 20 minutes. Get that done, and then you're going to go open up a business bank account. Right? I really believe that you want to have a separate bank account for doing this. It's two reasons. One, it's just gonna be a lot easier to keep your records because you can use your bank statements. Your bank account is really the basis of your business, right? Like when you do even fancy accounting stuff with QuickBooks, it's taking the information out of these accounts. So this is kind of the main building block. And then when we figure out the kind of money you need, you're gonna fund it into this account. Now that doesn't mean you have to have it all in one lump sum, right? You may have to take time to put that money in there, but we want to keep those funds separate so we can keep it really clean and understand your expenses on this, and then how the profits are coming into the business. So with those things in place, what we're driving towards is becoming cash flow positive, right? We're just kind of doing a rinse repeat cycle here as you're putting your books out. And we're working towards that point where the business can start paying for itself. What do we need to kind of have figured out here for this process? Because first off, understand this cash flow positive phase can take some time, okay? We're gonna need to get the business set up. We're gonna need to understand expenses a little bit. We're gonna talk about how we can figure out the right investment, the right growth rate. So one of the big things at this point is, a number one question I get is like, when do I get my business set up, like an actual company? So I'm not going to go too much into this as far as like the process of doing it, because I've got a book that like walks you through it. I've got courses that can show you how to do it. I've got videos on YouTube. But what I want you to have is an understanding of at least my opinion on when you do and when you don't set up an LLC and then get it treated like an S Corp. First off, like I said, you're all sole proprietors, right? And you can run a business that way forever. Now, there's some tax and liability issues when you do that. What I use as a rule of thumb with this is it's always about best use of cash, right? So, let's say most states it costs about $150 to set up an LLC. Well, if you're wondering how you're going to pay for a book cover, you don't need to set up an LLC. You need to take that $150 and put it into that book cover. Because, I was talking to this lady over here, it's like the state of Oklahoma or the state of Virginia is not going to help her sell her books, right? The book cover will, right? We need to get an awesome product in the market, make money, and then we can worry about protecting that money. So your driving thing is thinking like an investor, right? You know how much money you have. Now thinking like a CEO, how do you maximize that money? How can you make that money get the most bang for its buck? And that means, in my view, you should look at not doing an LLC until you're at least making about $10,000, okay? Because then it starts to make sense as far as your expenses. Now, each one of these varies state to state. You actually set up your company in your state. Most of the times an LLC works really well. There's some states where a corporation is better, okay? These are the legal structures that you would set up and create your business. Now there's another thing called doing business as. Now what doing business as is just a way to give your sole proprietorship a different name. So like, I'm still sole proprietor, I don't have a company, but I want to call it Joko. I can go and register that name with my county and get that as a doing business as. My personal opinion is that if I'm going to go through that pain in the ass, I may as well go set up a company. So if you feel that you're in a situation where you need to protect your identity at some level because of what you're writing, or you're writing books. The other thing is, if you're writing books about sword swallowing or flamethrowers or something, you probably should set up an LLC just to protect yourself, right? Especially if you're like in a professional services thing, it's nice to have that, because what the LLC does different than a doing business as is not only does it create a separate identity, it creates a separate entity, okay? It's a different company, it's almost like a different person that can have different assets and is treated different by how the legal system sees it. And again, if you're interested in your specific situation, this is a great thing to use that call with me about, to talk through your specific situation. So the other thing I get a lot of questions about is expenses and what can be expensed. And I'm not going to go into all the details of things that can be expensed, but understand as an author, just like any other business, your operating expenses, things like this conference can be expensed. When you are running things through your business, you're making a decision about what's going to happen with cash in your business, right? So you can choose to spend money on something, right? And in my example, I'm going to use a 30% tax rate. If you made $100 and you just kept the money in the business, you'd have to spend $30 on that tax rate. You'd have $70 in cash, right? That can be then used for whatever you want, right? Now, in the same situation, if you have an expense like a book cover, and you had it at $100, you could spend it on the book cover. That's 100% deductible to the business. You're not going to pay any taxes on that. But understand, that cash is gone. Like, you can't do it, you can't say, oh, well, now I think I'm not going to do that type of genre, I'm going to need a new book cover. That money's gone. So really think through it, not about like how you're getting out of taxes, but again, how you're using your cash. Let's see, at that point. So let's move on. So here's a tool that I have for you guys. This is free, it's on our website, and it's a way for you to plan the cash you're going to need for 5 years. And it's designed specifically for authors. You go in and you put in your words per day, how many days a week you write, number of days in a week, the number of weeks, and it's going to figure out for you how many books potentially, the number of words you write, helps you figure out how many books. So this is kind of our foundation. The next section is going to help you capture all of your costs, right? So if you're the kind of person that wants to really get after this, but you're just not going to go make a spreadsheet and you're not going to, just do this. Please just do this, okay? Because it's going to open your eyes as to the kind of cash you're going to need for your business to be successful, okay? And the cool thing about this, I think, because I made it, is that you can do multiple scenarios, right? So like you can figure it out one way, like you can say, well, I'm gonna be a maniac. I'm gonna put myself into like post-traumatic stress by writing as many books as I can in a year. You can try that out all up and then see how much money it's gonna cost, and you're like, ooh, I don't think I want to do that, right? And then you can figure out like that sweet spot between the money you know you have, your writing pace, and understand how long it's going to take for your business to be profitable or not, right? Because what's going to happen is it's going to generate a chart like this. It's going to show you by year your profit. And again, this is like a rough back of the envelope calculation for people that don't have envelopes to write on. And the total capital needed, right? Like, you do this, and you're like in the top 1% of all business owners in the United States because you've actually got a cash flow plan, right? Like, that's how sad it is for us as entrepreneurs. It's like we're so hell-bent on doing what we want to do, we don't figure out how to get there, right? Like, let's all just jump in our car and not look at the gas gauge and drive, right? And why did we run out of gas? Okay? So let's talk about return of capital. I think this is an interesting one. We're not going all the top of the mountain because that would be like a week-long session to get us to the 9 to 5 piece. But I know that's the objective for a lot of you is to exit your 9 to 5. But I came up with this guideline, and I call it the 40-10 guideline. So it goes something like this. Once you start making cash and your business is going, it's like, what's the right growth rate? And what do I mean by that? Well, I've observed authors that are crushing it, right? Folks that you're like, I want to be that person. That's my deal. That's who they get. You got a picture of them on your mirror. I'm gonna be that one, right? Well, they're after this, right? And their business grows at 100%, 200%, 300%, and they're like, Joe, what happened to all my cash? It's like, well, did you spend it on a bunch of stuff? It's like, no, I've been doing this since growing the business. Well, that's where your money is. It's all in the business. It's out there in book covers and books waiting to get launched, and all that capital is just stuck there as working capital in this business that's 5 times the size as it was 18 months ago, and it didn't have the right amount of money. You had to figure out what your right growth rate was and adjust it down, right? And that's hard for a lot of people to accept, but it's going to get rid of a lot of heartburn if you do this right. So how does this work? So think about it this way, and I'm using 40% as a tax rate, just assuming like federal tax and what state tax you have. But the actual number that would be in that 40 would be your actual tax rate, right? So when $1 comes into your business as revenue, after expenses, we're now talking about profit. So every $1 of profit, you take 40% of it, you set that aside. That's going to go to taxes. That's not your money, never was. It's Uncle Sam's, okay? Then what's left over is 60 cents, right? We're going to take 10% of that, 6 cents of that dollar, and you're going to take that out of the business. That's going to you, because that's after-tax money. That's money that we're starting to pay the investor back, right? They're getting their money back little bit by little bit, because I've hit some big businesses in my time, and I'll tell you this, the whole game changes when you get their investors back their money, right? Like the latitude that an institutional investor will give you once they get their initial capital back, all of a sudden you're a genius because they don't have any more chips on the table. They're playing with house money. So think about the same way with your own, right? Now you've got 54 cents of that, slam it back in that business, right? That's the money you use to keep this thing going and grow it. And what I know from this model is because if you're investing that 54 cents, when you kind of get through to your quarterly estimates, you're going to find out your taxes aren't as high, you're going to have a little extra money, there's going to be some cash there to play with. But the point is, if you just follow this rule, you're not going to get yourself into trouble. So, going back to our mountain analogy now. So, the interesting thing is that, our boy Hillary climbed the mountain, and then for a long time, nobody tried it again. All of these expeditions back here were, done by countries that wanted to put their flag on the top of the mountain. But then there got to be a point where everybody was going to climb this mountain. Technology has changed, right? The ability of people to understand how to do this changed. And this is like how I envision the industry. And if anybody was following things this year, they had the record number of summits on Everest this year. That number is actually it was actually over 900, okay? It's also the record number for deaths, okay? Well, why was that? Well, when the window opened up for the weather, these guys are just below that death zone, right? And the weather changes, now they got the chance, it's like 2 in the morning, they get this chance they're gonna start climbing this mountain. Guess what? There's like 800-900 people on this mountain, and they're all trying to do it. And that's an actual photo from this year. That's like spring break at Disney World, right? So what happens is now they're all jammed up on this mountain. A lot of them summited. So when you look at the deaths on, and I talk about a record number of deaths, there's the biggest chunk of deaths is Sherpas dying, getting the trail ready for everybody else. Like that's 60% of the deaths. So let's take that out of it. The next biggest number was actually on descent. And it was climbers that had gotten past that point in the death zone and started on their descent having organ failure. And they're losing their faculties and falling and dying. And so what they did is they decided to push their business, right? They decided that trying to get that goal was more important than doing it safely. They didn't follow what Boudrillard and Evans did and stop and say, listen, if we want the best for our expedition and getting to that goal, we need to kind of pull ourselves back and not push as hard. And the reason I use this is that to make this point too, is that we're in a more crowded environment now. There's more and more authors that have the capability to get in there and find that. And especially when you come off a conference like this and you're hearing a lot of the same things, right? There's a lot of great advice that you want to follow. But now that makes you start to climb the same mountain. So what I want you to think about is this. Look to where the money is for you. And the money comes from your readers, right? It doesn't come from Amazon, it doesn't come from Kobo. All the money that drives this entire industry comes from readers that want an emotional experience from you. So whenever you start to get confused about what mountain you should summit or how you're gonna summit that mountain, go back to this first principle. Where is that audience that you want to capture and go after that? So let me wrap up and just reiterate some points here. You need to plan your cash flow. I think I beat that horse, right? Yeah. Do it by the launch. And then I gave you a great tool here to do it 3 to 5 years out, right? You do that, like I said, you're gonna be top of the industry as far as having tools to perform. Your first milestone has to be getting cash flow positive. That's your base camp, right? You don't worry about like, I'm gonna be writing on a beach, and I'm gonna buy a summer home, and I'm gonna, all that stuff, if you don't do these other things like get cash flow positive and get your money back to you, don't happen, right? That's all businesses. So focus on it by milestone, and just give yourself that relief. You don't have to worry about that other stuff. Learn your business. Learn how these sales curves impact things. It's going to be different from all of you because I've looked at hundreds of these things and everybody's got different nuances. And never forget who's paying the bills, right? Now I know I went kind of long here. I had a lot of stuff to cover. I only got a minute, but I'll just open it up to questions.
We're not going to have time.
No questions? All right, well I will be available in the hall to talk to people, so I don't want to, I know you got another session to go to, so, or set up, so I will, I'll be out in the hall and be happy to hang out and talk to people and answer any questions they can. Thanks a lot.